Hi, it's Katrina. I hope you brought your parka today because it's about to get cold and mysterious. The ice hides all kinds of secrets, and today I'll be showing some new things that have been popping up. From lost civilizations, extinct beasts, and so much more, let's get going. The city buried under the ice. Is there an ancient civilization waiting to be discovered underneath the Antarctic ice? Some say yes, without a doubt. In fact, images taken straight from Google Earth seem to show the ruins of a lost city. Could these be real stone remnants poking out from the fluffy white blanket of Antarctic snow? Here's a picture from Google Earth. It looks like your standard circular fortification. The supposed city looks just like circular forts that can be found all across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. It's roughly 400 feet across, divided into sections that may have been neighborhoods, with the remains of its walls 100% visible. But is it a city or nothing but a coincidence? Scientists say the mystery structure is a sastrugi, which is a natural formation created by wind and snow. But it doesn't look that natural, does it? It looks man-made, and to be honest, sastrugi aren't known for making oval shapes. It could be that scientists are trying to dismiss the discovery as easily as possible. But not every scientist agrees with the sastrugi explanation. Ashoka Tripathi from the University of Calcutta said there is clear evidence of a human settlement beneath the ice. Ashoka spoke of a picture released by NASA, this one, and said it shows a human structure under nearly a mile of solid ice near the edge of Lake Vostok. This is interesting because humans have always had a tendency to build settlements at the edges of lakes. Since the dawn of time, tribes have set up shop near water. Who doesn't want a summer cabin at the edge of a picturesque lake? If there was an ancient civilization in Antarctica, they would have wanted to build a city at the edge of a lake, especially one as deep as Lake Vostok. In the end, scientists can only speculate. I think somebody needs to get down to Antarctica with a great big shovel and start digging. Only then will anyone know for sure if there is a city buried beneath the ice. An epic mammoth bone. A typhoon left Alaska brutally battered in 2022. It also left one couple with an astonishing treasure. After intense winds damaged homes and knocked out power, a married couple stumbled upon a humongous mammoth bone. It's a femur many thousands of years old, a surviving remnant from a creature that might be making a comeback soon. Wait, a comeback? That's right, a mammoth comeback, pun intended. Let me tell you about the bone, and then I'll tell you about how you could see a mammoth in your lifetime. When the storm was over, Joseph and Andrea Nasik of Elim, a remote Alaskan town 100 miles from Nome, went for a hike. They often walk along the beach near their house to see if anything interesting washed up on shore. The femur is only the latest in a long string of amazing discoveries. Look at this picture of them holding it, the screenshot from KTUU. The bone is almost bigger than both of them. Joseph had to strap it to his backpack and carry it home like he was a pack mule. The single femur weighs an incredible 62 pounds and is nearly 4 feet long. Even though it's huge, it isn't the biggest thing they've discovered. Joseph and Andrea have found pieces of mammoth vertebrae, random toe bones, and fragments from skulls. But their best discovery was a 7-foot-long mammoth tusk, worth anywhere from $20,000 to $70,000. The tusk has turned blue from the mineral vivianite, which slowly formed in its 105-pound tusk since the creature died more than 10,000 years ago. Joseph and Andrea haven't sold the tusk yet, but they will one day. When they do, they'll use the huge payday to purchase a house for their family. What would you do if a trip to the beach landed you a prehistoric relic worth merely $100 grand? I promised to tell you about the mammoth comeback, so here it is. A company named Colossal Biosciences has said that by the year 2027, the mammoth will be back. The company, based out of Dallas, is currently working day and night to reintroduce a woolly mammoth into the ecosystem where it once lived. How are they doing it? It's surprisingly simple, though definitely not easy. The DNA of a woolly mammoth is 99.6% the same as the DNA of an Asian elephant. Colossal Biosciences is genetically manipulating mammoth DNA and implanting an embryo into a living Asian elephant. If it works, the elephant will give birth to a live mammoth. With 2024 well underway, there are only 3 more years of waiting for a mammoth. Are you excited or disturbed by this? Let me know in the comments below. The Partridge Creek monster. A story was published in a newspaper more than 100 years ago involving a man and a dinosaur. The newspaper claimed it to be a real story, though people today call it fiction. I want you to be the judge of whether a dinosaur really lives in Canada or not. James Lewis Butler was a banker at the start of the 20th century. He and his miner friend Tom went hunting for moose near Clear Creek in Canada's Yukon Territory. As they stalked moose, suddenly the animals started running away in terror. The animals weren't scared of James and Tom. They were scared of something else entirely. It was like that scene from Jurassic Park when all the herbivore dinosaurs run away, freaking out before the T-Rex comes. At first, James and Tom didn't know what to do. The moose were gone, but there appeared to be something else in the forest with them. After a bit of looking around, they found some tracks, which were enormous. James and Tom followed the tracks into a deep, rocky gorge. James and Tom didn't see anything right away. They couldn't track down the creature, so they went back to town. Once in civilization, they gathered a larger group of men to hunt down the mysterious beast. Then they went back to the deep rocky gorge with Georges Dupuy, Father Pierre Laveneau, and 5 First Nations people. They were now a crew of 9. The group established a camp overlooking a ravine near Partridge Creek. Then the creature came. It was ridiculously huge, a behemoth of an animal. The group couldn't believe what they were seeing. You wouldn't have believed it either. A behemoth described as 30 feet long and covered in hair came stomping up the side of the creek. They thought it was a dinosaur, an Arctic dinosaur covered in a thick layer of fur. It walked on 2 legs and most closely resembled a tyrannosaur. The creature kept going along the creek, and that was the last the group saw of it. None of them were brave enough to follow what they figured was a prehistoric monstrosity. It wasn't like hunting a moose. This thing had teeth. Big teeth. All the better for eating humans with. How much of this story do you think is true? I'm only asking because James and Tom were laughingstocks when they went back to Golden City and told people what they'd seen. Dupuy wrote an account of the incident, which was published in a few magazines. The Dawson Daily Nugget compared him to Edgar Allan Poe. Nobody believed George's tale, and everyone thought James and Tom were nuts. To this day, nobody has ever found proof that the Partridge Creek monster roams the snowy valleys of northern Canada. In 1908, naturalist Richard Lydecker dismissed the story as a hoax. Do you think there are mysterious, unknown creatures lurking in the forests of cold places? Let me know in the comments below. The skull of Vega Island. This satellite image was taken by the European Union's Copernicus Sentinel-2 in February of 2023. It looks like an ordinary island at first, but look a little closer. You'll notice in the center of the image is the profile of a skull, or a skull-like face. Either way your imagination interprets it, the skull is freaky. The satellite image is of Vega Island, located on the Antarctic Peninsula. Since the photograph was taken, the icy skull has become the haunting face of climate change. You'll understand why in a second when I show you an even earlier satellite image. Behold the exact same island as seen from space on January 31st, 1977. This satellite image was taken by NASA. If you look close enough, you can see the eye of the skull. This isn't a story about a skull, really. It's a story about change. Look at how much more snow and ice covered Vega Island at the end of the 1970s. The whole island was white, whereas today barely any ice remains. This is what is happening to Antarctica. No matter how many predictions scientists make, nobody knows what Antarctica will look like in 20 years. But seeing as the Antarctic Peninsula is warming about 5 times faster than the global average, all the ice could be gone. The silver lining is that once the ice is gone, the fossil hunt will be on. Paleontologists will be scouring Antarctica for traces of dead dinosaurs, while others will be hunting for the ruins of a lost civilization. Which group are you in? Stack of skulls. Antarctica, Greenland, Canada, Alaska, these are the places that get the most attention when it comes to icy discoveries. But let's not forget Mongolia, home of Genghis Khan and the Mongol hordes. It too is covered in sheets of ice where archaeologists have been making some incredible finds. Mongolia is one of the emptiest countries in the world. Its yawning expanse of wilderness home to mostly caribou, elk, bison, and reindeer. Yet in the high mountains of the Altai region, some of the earliest pastoral societies thrived. These were some of the earliest humans to break away from their nomadic ways and start farming and keeping animals. Unfortunately, there isn't much left of these ancient societies. Archaeologists only know about them because of a handful of discoveries. They have found creepy burials underneath huge mounds of snow and ruins thawed from blocks of ice. Every now and again, researchers come across something like this. It's a pile of Argali sheep skulls and horn skulls from about 1500 years ago. The picture was taken by William Taylor in western Mongolia, right at the edge of a glacier. It appears the skulls were stacked in a great pile on purpose by ancient hunters. But why? Nobody knows. Recently, a team of scholars from the University of Colorado teamed up with the National Museum of Mongolia. They went out into the Mongolian wilderness in search of lost civilizations. They found a few artifacts in a melting patch of ice at the top of a mountain. One of the artifacts was a woven piece of animal hair rope. It's 1,500 years old and was likely part of a harness. Remember, the ancient people of Mongolia were expert horseback riders. Other cool things have been found in these icy mountains, from spears to arrows used at the same time the Mongolian armies were raging through Eastern Europe. But the one thing that hasn't been found is the tomb of Genghis Khan. Could the emperor's missing grave be in the Altai Mountains, hidden under ice and snow? What do you think? Ice Age horses. A very rare skull was found near Dawson City, Yukon. Local paleontologist Grant Zazula said the skull belonged to an ancient horse that lived during the Ice Age. I know that woolly mammoths get all the attention, but what about the prehistoric horses? The intact skull was found buried in the muck, underneath what used to be a solid sheet of ice. Here's the picture of Grant with the skull, submitted by Grant himself. But just what kinds of horses lived in America during the Ice Age? The last one went extinct about 12,000 years ago, so scientists rely on skulls like the one Grant found to understand them. The horse family itself is more than 50 million years old, dating back to a common ancestor of all horses, zebras, and donkeys. In the Ice Age, there were two main types of horses roaming across North America. There were horses very similar to the ones still alive now. Then there were stilt-legged horses, strange creatures with slender feet that died alongside the dire wolf and the saber-toothed cat. And now for a quick break because it's shout-out time! I want to give a huge thank you to James Barnard and John Stamos for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. The Last Stand Against Russia. In Alaska, archaeologists discovered one of the most important fortresses anywhere in North America. This epic stronghold was used by the Native Americans as they tried to protect themselves from the fury of the Russian army. As you may know already, the United States purchased Alaska for $7 million in 1867. Who did they buy it from? From the Russians, who had been occupying Alaska since 1804. But the Russians didn't just walk onto the beach and plant their flag. They waded through a river of blood to take Alaska. Before the Russians arrived, the Tlingit clans controlled coastal Alaska. In 1799, Russia sent an army to take their land, which they wanted to expand their fur trade. The initial attack failed in 1802, with the Tlingit beating back the Russian advance. But the natives knew that the Russians weren't finished. So they built a great wooden stronghold that was to be their last stand against the invaders. The Tlingit armed the fort with everything they had. The fortress itself stood at the mouth of the Indian River in what is now the town of Sitka. Archaeologists discovered the ruins of the fortress in Sitka National Historical Park, right at the edge of the city. The Russians came again in 1804, and this time they meant business. It was a major battle with the Tlingit clans holding off the Russian forces for 5 days. Things went wrong when a supply of gunpowder blew up in a canoe on its way to the fort. The surviving Tlingit escaped by night, abandoning the fortress. The Russians burned it to the ground and then established a trading post. After more than 200 years, the fort has been rediscovered. Though if you plan on visiting Sitka, keep in mind that nothing of the fort is left. Archaeologists only found trace remains of its burned-down walls in the forest. The Iceman's tattoos. If you lived 5,300 years ago, what kinds of tattoos do you think you would have? In the case of Otzi the Iceman, he opted for a lot of tattoos. 61 to be exact. You're not going to believe the things that this real-life caveman had tattooed all over himself. I'm sure you know who Otzi is, but if you don't know, you're in for a treat. He was discovered frozen in the Italian Alps by a pair of hikers in September of 1991. Since then, scientists have been busy analyzing every last piece of the Iceman's life. As the only frozen caveman ever discovered, he is an invaluable specimen. Early on in the studies, scientists realized that Otzi was covered in tattoos. It came as a shock because although tattooing has been around for eons, physical proof of it is rare. Skin doesn't typically last for more than 5,000 years. Scientists could see his tattoos, but there was still the matter of deciphering their meaning. I think anyone with an obscure tattoo has experienced the question, what does your tattoo mean? Well, that's what scientists wanted to ask Otzi. Only since they couldn't bring him back to life to ask him, they resorted to technology. To figure out the meanings of his tattoos, researchers turned to multispectral imaging techniques. This allowed them to fully map all the tattoos on his body. Scientists then organized the 61 tattoos into 19 groups. Each group is a specific set of horizontal or vertical lines. Otzi didn't have images tattooed on him. No skulls, no butterflies, no flowers, and not an ex-girlfriend's name either. And even though he was an actual caveman, he didn't have any tribal tattoos. What he did have were a lot of strange lines clustered into certain areas. Scientists think the tattoos were therapeutic in nature. Many of them were grouped around his lower back and joints. An analysis of Otzi's body has shown that he suffered from joint and spinal degeneration. Researchers suspect that Otzi's tattoos were not necessarily decorative. They may have been medicinal, used like acupuncture treatments in places where Otzi experienced pain. Then again, researchers could be dead wrong. Otzi's body art could have been related to his prowess as a warrior. Maybe each tattoo represented a kill in battle. Without a time machine, there's just no way anyone can know for certain. One disgusting smudge. The final entry in a polar explorer's diary has baffled experts for more than 100 years. Now that the mystery has been solved, I can tell you all about it. But be warned, it's both disturbing and disgusting. The diary belonged to Inuit explorer Jorgen Bronlund. He and 2 other men embarked on a dangerous expedition in his native country of Greenland in the first decade of the 20th century. The team was led by ethnologist Ludvig Eriksson with the goal to chart the northeastern territories between 1906 and 1908. Tragically, all 3 members of the party died. As they tried to return to base camp, the weather turned against them. Team leader Ludvig was the first to go. Then the expedition's cartographer, Niels Peter Hagen. Bronlund was the last to perish in November of 1907. He was also the only one recovered. His body found frozen in the back of a remote cave. As he lay in that cave, starving, he recorded his final thoughts in a diary. I should mention that starving to death is one of the absolute worst ways to go. Imagine that terrible feeling in your belly when you're really hungry, only multiplied by 1,000,000. Add in a frozen cave and the brutal loneliness of Greenland's empty landscape, you can get a feel for what Bronlund felt in his final moments. Just take this line from his diary as proof of his tribulations. The last page reads, "I cannot go on because of my frozen feet and the darkness." He wasn't just starving, his feet had frozen to a point he couldn't even walk on them. Then, if he could have walked, it was so dark he couldn't see where he was going. And where was he supposed to go anyway? There's always been one thing that has confused people. On the last page of Bronlund's diary is a huge black smudge. Nobody was ever able to figure out what that smudge was until now. The diary was recovered in 1908 and has been on display at the Royal Library in Copenhagen ever since. In 1993, researchers removed it from the display and analyzed the mysterious black smudge. But the technology wasn't sophisticated enough. Nobody could determine its chemical composition. Now, scientists at the University of Southern Denmark use new and improved XRF and plasma mass spectrometry to determine the chemical makeup of the smudge. It turns out the smudge is made of 3 main ingredients: oils, burnt rubber, and human feces. It sounds gross, and I admit it is, but it also adds a new layer of tragedy to what was already a miserable situation for our polar hero. Jorgen Bronlund had been so desperate to live that he tried to burn his own waste. likely in an attempt to keep warm and see through the brutal Greenland darkness. Creepy graves and ancient myths. In Greenland, frozen mummies hide beneath the ice. The ancient mummies I'm going to show you are even creepier than Egyptian or Peruvian mummies, yet almost nobody's even heard of them. Greenland is not only the biggest island in the world, but it's also been home to countless cultures over the millennia. Even though the island was covered in solid glaciers 4,000 years ago, people still lived on it. People like the ancient Thule, a real culture that has since vanished into obscurity. The Thule are the ancestors of all modern Inuit people. They likely developed along the coast of Alaska, then spread across northern Canada all the way to Greenland. By the 13th century, they had started replacing the even earlier Dorset culture as the dominant peoples of the frozen northern world. When Europe was battling the plague, the Thule were enjoying a peaceful life in the snow. The Thule were very interesting. It's believed they had contact with the Vikings, maybe even trading traditions and treasures with them. Vikings mentioned a mysterious group of people from the west, whom they called the Skraelingar. The Vikings may have encountered members of Thule society in Greenland and in North America in the 11th century. Now let's talk about a myth. You may have heard the name Thule before in reference to a mysterious island in Greek mythology, but is the myth the same as reality? According to the ancient Greeks, more than 2,000 years ago, Thule was the northernmost island in the world. Legend has it that the explorer Pytheas sailed his ship past Britain until he arrived in a frozen nightmare land of snow and strange people. Pytheas wrote that the Thule lived on millet and herbs, eating roots and grains. He said the land of Thule was dim, lacking any kind of sunshine, except in the summer, when there was nothing but sunshine. The island of Thule could have been Iceland, although there is no evidence of humans living in Iceland 2,000 years ago. The first people in Iceland were the Vikings in the 9th century. Some have suggested the Greek myth was talking about the island of Smola off the coast of Norway. But the only thing that really makes sense is that Pytheas had sailed to Greenland and met the actual Thule civilization. It's possible, but remains unconfirmed. In 1972, a pair of brothers were hunting for grouse outside the abandoned settlement of Kilakitsuk when they came across a cave. Inside the cave were piles of frozen stones. The stone piles had clearly been put there on purpose. It looked as if they were marking burials. Sure enough, the brothers had happened upon a pair of grave chambers. Spread across the two graves were the frozen, mummified remains of 6 women and 2 children. It's about to get even weirder. Here's a picture of the mummies from the official Visit Greenland website. You can see the mummy of a 6-month-old child and their mother. In the Thule culture, it wasn't unusual for young children to be buried alive with their dead mothers. This was part of a ritual that might seem barbaric to you, but it was seen as a necessity to the Thule. If a young child's mother tragically died, the child had nobody to take care of it. The Thule saw it as a mercy to bury the child with the mother in a spiritual ceremony. That might be what happened in the cave outside Kilakitsuk, but nobody knows. Scientific analysis dated the mummies to 1475. Every single one of them died at the same time. 5 of the women have facial tattoos, reminiscent of our friend Otzi the Iceman. They were all dressed in warm furs and even had extra furs buried with them in case they needed them in the afterlife. The ghost city of the Arctic. There is a ghost town in the Arctic that was once home to hundreds of people. Nowadays, only 1 resident remains. Most of the year, it's completely frozen. In the summer, when things get less deadly, the town receives maybe 10 visitors. If you've been looking for a cheap place to rent, the Norwegian city of Pyramiden might be your best option. Good luck getting there, though! Pyramiden is in the archipelago of Svalbard, close to the North Pole. It was originally founded by Sweden in 1910. In 1927, the Swedes sold it to the Soviet Union. The Soviets turned it into a coal mining settlement. Coal mines attracted workers. They do say we yearn for the mines. The remote town grew to have a population of roughly 1,000. Things started to pick up, the future looking bright. A primary school was built, there was a cantina where you could get a drink and a meal, there was even a swimming pool, the northernmost swimming pool in the entire world. The town kept extracting coal until 1998. It was only when the Soviet Union collapsed that the town also collapsed. By the end of that year, Pyramiden was a ghost town. It remained untouched until 2007. The first people to return found the settlement exactly as it had been when it was abandoned. The frigid cold and relentless ice had kept the town from decaying. In 2012, Alexander Romanovsky became the first person to live in the settlement full-time since it was abandoned. Then in 2013, a hotel opened. The hotel has since been renovated so that particularly adventurous explorers can visit Pyramiden. How would you like to spend your summer exploring this cold and creepy place? Don't even think about it in the winter when there is no sun and nothing but snowy darkness. Artifacts in ancient volcano. Archaeologists have found artifacts in a faraway and remote place. In a vast volcanic landscape in Canada, researchers chipped ancient relics out of the solid ice. This amazing discovery brings us to Mount Edziza Provincial Park, ancient hunting grounds of the indigenous group the Tahltan. The Tahltan were one of the earliest First Nations people in Canada, thriving in the isolated northern zones of British Columbia 7,000 years ago. The provincial park is huge, still partially covered in ice, but rapidly warming. As Canada slowly superheats, the ice sheets that so recently covered the north are melting. In 2019, when archaeologists visited the park, they found hand axes, crude containers, and ice picks thawing after having been frozen for more than 70 centuries. They also found tools made from bone and obsidian stone. But that's not all. The team of researchers found other, less ancient items. They found some really cool wooden staffs that could have been carried by hunters while crawling across the volcanic terrain, looking like ancient Native American wizards. As for the park itself, it's one of the most dramatic places you can see in Canada. The mountain is a composite volcano that stretches nearly 10,000 feet into the clouds. The whole park is covered in lava flows and cinder fields. It's a realm of ice and fire. Thanks for watching! If you could bring back an extinct creature from the Ice Age, which one would you choose? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already.
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Mysterious ice ship. In a shocking discovery from Antarctica, what appears to be a huge ship locked in an iceberg has been spotted in satellite images. The ship appears to be about 400 feet long, totally encased in ice 100 miles from the coast. Authorities don't yet know exactly where the ship came from or how it became trapped in ice, as there are no records of a ship this size going missing near Antarctica. The vessel is a total mystery, and all we can really do is guess at what happened here. The biggest clue is that the ship looks like a cruise liner. It also appears to be completely on its side. You can even see the rows of windows from the cabins all along the hull and the smokestacks on the top of the boat. One of the wilder theories is that the boat stuck in the iceberg was from a lost Nazi base built in Antarctica nearly a century ago. More realistically, this was a ghost ship that was abandoned at sea and floated down to Antarctica. Then it tipped over, froze, and became one with a huge sheet of ice. While that is one possibility, it's also potentially just one big hunk of ice that looks remarkably like a giant ship. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The world's longest canyon. Underneath the Greenland ice sheet, researchers have discovered evidence of the longest canyon ever. And yes, it's even longer than the world-famous Grand Canyon. The enormous gorge goes all the way from the highest point in central Greenland to the Pyramiden glacier on the northwest coast. That's a distance of over 460 miles. But researchers believe the ravine in the canyon could be even longer, going further south, deep beneath the ice sheet where scientists can't see. If the ice wasn't here blocking the canyon, it would look almost identical to the huge chasm that's so famous in Arizona. It's 2,600 feet deep at some points and up to 6 miles wide. It also has distinctive V-shaped walls and a flat bottom. Researchers say this probably means the canyon was carved by flowing water. It's not the deepest canyon in the world, as that award still goes to the Mariana Trench at 35,827 feet. But it is the longest, even beating the 308-mile-long Yarlung Sangpo Grand Canyon in China. What makes this discovery especially interesting is the answers to questions that scientists have been asking for years. Everyone has always wondered what happens to water as it melts under Greenland's ice sheet. We know that it drains into the sea instead of pooling anywhere in the middle, But now we can see that the water is collecting at the bottom of a huge canyon and then being routed directly into the ocean. There is an entire underground river channel here, covered in a seriously thick layer of ice. Horse DNA. About a decade ago, soil samples were taken from Canada's Klondike region in the Yukon, scooped out from under a thick layer of permafrost. But instead of any scientific analysis being done to the samples, they were just stuck in a Canadian freezer at McMaster University. It wasn't until just a few months ago that researchers took the frozen soil samples out to see what they could find inside of them. And what they discovered is quite frankly shocking. These icy soil samples reveal DNA from a species of woolly mammoth and from species of wild horses that have been extinct for thousands of years. If you're wondering how animal DNA was found in the soil, it's not the same DNA you're probably thinking of. It's called environmental DNA, composed of microscopic residue left behind by a variety of animals as they move through a particular environment. By picking apart the DNA samples, scientists were able to see that animals from the Ice Age lived a lot longer than we had ever imagined before going extinct. What really shocked researchers, and indeed scientists around the world, is that the DNA present in the samples came from just 5,000 years ago. That means the woolly mammoths and the Ice Age horses, the ancestors of North American horses, were still alive in Canada alongside humans. They lived for 8,000 years longer than scientists previously thought. Frozen Brazilian yacht. The Mar Sem film, which in English translates roughly to Endless Sea, is a Brazilian yacht that was frozen in a solid brick of ice. The ship broke apart in Maxwell Bay on April 7, 2012. How? The yacht, which belonged to the famed Brazilian journalist and entrepreneur João Mesquita, was manned by 4 crews who were filming a documentary off the Antarctic coast when the boat ultimately capsized after being pummeled with strong winds of over 40 knots, along with waves estimated to be nearly 6 feet tall. The researchers were forced to radio for help before they all froze to death. Luckily, there happened to be a Chilean Navy base in the area. They were rescued by the Navy, though there was nothing that could be done about the yacht. It sank, but it didn't get very far. The yacht only made it about 30 feet deep before the water froze, the vessel's hull split in half, and it became trapped in ice. It made for an eerie picture, trapped beneath the surface and still clearly visible from above. The yacht's owner waited 10 months until the ice thawed and an attempt to recover the boat could finally be made. Ultimately, the time spent under the ice and the hull damage was too great to be repaired. Even once they got the ship back onto the shore, it was completely broken and beyond fixing, destined only for the salvage yard. Dangerous gases. Rising temperatures in the Arctic are causing a change in the environment. In the black spruce forests found in central Alaska along the Tanana River, trees have been tipping over, toppling to the ground, and slowly being absorbed by a soupy bog. Where once the ground was hard-packed ice, today it's more of a sloppy swamp of rain and snowmelt. There is no denying that the world is steadily getting warmer and the permafrost in the north is thawing. One of the most horrendous things to come from all this melting permafrost is an increase in greenhouse gases. A recent study done by Alaska scientist Merritt Turetsky and his team have found that under the ice there is a lot more gas than previously thought. They have confirmed in recent years that as the ice thaws, huge bursts of gas are gushing into the atmosphere. It's a process known as abrupt thaw, with gases being released from the ice contributing majorly to the very issue causing all this gas to be released in the first place. Still, all the gas being found under the ice doesn't have nearly as big of an impact as what people are doing by burning coal and creating other emissions. Thawing permafrost is, however, expected to amplify climate change caused by humans. According to a recent report by National Geographic, the effects will be amplified by about 20%, and all because of gas under the ice. Jewels on a French glacier. Back in 2013, a mountaineer was climbing Mont Blanc, the French glacier, when he came across a literal treasure. The treasure was stashed inside a metal box, which experts say was on board a plane from India that crashed into the mountain over 50 years earlier. The mountaineer couldn't believe his luck when he pried open the metal box and was staring at a treasure trove of emeralds, sapphires, and rubies. They were just sitting right there, the metal box half frozen in a chunk of glacier ice. In total, the treasure is worth an estimated $340,000. The mountaineer turned out to be a really good citizen as well. After he finished climbing the mountain, he handed the treasure over to the local authorities. He didn't want to steal somebody's precious gems. Additionally, if you find treasure in the mountains, French law says you have to give it to the police. And in the end, being a good citizen really paid off. 8 years after the discovery, local authorities finally agreed to split the profit from the gemstones with the climber. That's a total profit for him of $169,000. But you're probably wondering what the box of treasure had to do with the plane that crashed. In 1950 and in 1966, there were plane crashes on Mont Blanc, both of them Air India planes. Over the years, climbers have occasionally stumbled upon chunks of debris, human bodies, and pieces of luggage frozen in the ice. Authorities say the precious stones were probably from the flight in 1966, bound for New York. The crash killed 117 people, and one of them had apparently brought a whole hoard of jewels into America. What would you do if you found a box of jewels frozen in ice? Would you hand it over to the authorities or stash it away and hide it? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe before you go. We have lots more videos coming up. Cold War fossils. Back during the Cold War, the US was busy digging out a chunk of northwestern Greenland as part of Project Iceworm. It was in 1966, a covert mission to create a nuclear base beneath the Greenland ice sheet capable of striking the Soviet Union with nuclear warheads. The project was kept top secret until decades later, and even still, it's hard to believe the US tried something so unusual. Creating a subterranean ice base sounds more like the plot of a spy movie than an actual US military project. But the mission was a failure. Project Iceworm was ultimately ended. Camp Century, the base itself, was abandoned. So too were ice core samples taken by scientists during the initial construction of the base. But the US didn't care about boring old ice cores back then, so the samples were stuffed in a freezer in Denmark and ignored for decades. Then, in 2019, a group of scientists finally investigated what the Cold War scientists had dug up, and it's really quite fascinating. The scientists found fragments of fossilized plants, life forms that bloomed millions of years ago. These plants prove that Greenland hasn't really been covered in ice for that long. Up until now, it was believed that Greenland had been covered in ice for 3 million years, but that couldn't possibly be the case. The fossilized plants show beyond a doubt that there was significant tundra-like climate on Greenland during that time, which wouldn't have been possible if the ice wasn't there. Scientists believe that at some point in the last 2.6 million years, Greenland lost its giant ice sheet, shifted to a tundra, and eventually regained its ice. Expedition ship frozen solid. In 2014, an Antarctic expedition ship became stranded in the ice. Members of the Australasian Antarctic expedition on board the MV Academic Chokolaski got stuck for 10 days at Christmas, with absolutely no way out. They had to call in a Chinese icebreaker to come to their rescue, along with a reroute of an Australian icebreaker to help. They originally called a French icebreaker, but it had to retreat when it became clear that the ice was so thick that even it couldn't help out the ship. 52 members of the expedition were trapped until a helicopter team finally came to airlift the scientists and tourists to safety. When the ship got stuck, it was trying to make its way through clear water to a small cluster of rocky islands called the Hodgman Islands. But the clear water suddenly froze. The ice came out of nowhere and they couldn't move. By Christmas Eve, the captain realized there was no way they could get to the open water just 2 nautical miles in front of them. The ice was thick and just kept accumulating. After a few more days, open water was no longer 2 nautical miles ahead, but 20 nautical miles. That's just how fast the ice builds up in Antarctica. With almost no warning, the ship was trapped in a rapidly growing iceberg. With international help, the ship was finally freed, but it was a very close call. Ultra-hot, super ionic ice. Scientists have made a fascinating new discovery involving ice. They call the discovery ultra-hot super ionic ice, and it appears to be a new and mysterious phase of water never seen before. Scientists created this new form of ice by squeezing a water droplet between a pair of diamonds and then blasting it with one of the most powerful lasers in the world. See? Science is fun! The super ionic ice is actually water that exists at the same pressure and temperature as what can be found at the center of the Earth. Prior to this discovery, researchers had only managed to create super ionic ice for 20 nanoseconds before it dissolved. They did this by using shock waves. But by squeezing a water droplet between the diamonds and then blasting it with the laser to temperatures found inside a star, they were able to make the ice stable enough to steady. This is now the 18th phase of ice to be discovered, and one of the weirdest. Its oxygen atoms lock into place just like they normally do when water freezes, but the hydrogen atoms give up their electrons and become ions, free-flowing as a fluid. What this means is that ultra-hot superionic ice is both a solid and a liquid at the same time. It's a cube of ice with flowing hydrogen atoms inside of it. Pretty incredible, huh? Would you ever think of blasting lasers at diamond-squeezed water droplets? Didn't think so. Mysteriously draining lakes. NASA has discovered a mysterious system of draining lakes beneath the Antarctic ice. They found 2 new lakes of frigid water between 1.2 and 2.5 miles beneath the ice on the southernmost part of the continent. What's truly strange is that these subterranean lakes fill and drain repeatedly in a cycle that scientists say could influence how meltwater flows into the Southern Ocean. And of course, the flow of meltwater from the ice is what influences currents in the Southern Ocean, affecting temperatures across the world. The lakes are located at the very bottom of the ice sheet, where the ice touches the rocky part of the Antarctic continent. Scientists believe the lakes are formed as a result of pressure and friction, and maybe even geothermal heat from below. Whatever the case, scientists only discovered the lakes because of NASA's IceSat satellite using lasers to measure elevations of the ice. As the lakes fill and then drain, the ice above rises and falls. This shows there is a lake system beneath, releasing water into the ocean. Just how much water? In January, scientists found that just one of these lakes, located beneath the Amory ice shelf in eastern Antarctica, flushed about 198 billion gallons into the ocean in just 3 days. And while this may sound kind of boring, it's actually a critical system that influences seasonal dips in temperature as cold air currents move around the world. Discovering why billions of gallons of horribly cold water are dumped into the ocean from under the ice is key in understanding how all the weather systems of our world are connected.
Hyena teeth. A pair of fossilized teeth were discovered in Canada's Yukon Territory in the Old Crow Basin back in the 1970s. The teeth were pulled from an area once entirely covered by ice, along with 50,000 other mammal fossils that have been collected over the past century. Because the basin was frozen for so long, all these fossils remained amazingly preserved. And although the actual bodies of the hyenas weren't found, their teeth have been enough for scientists to learn what they were doing in North America. Even though the teeth were found in the 1970s, it wasn't until quite recently that researchers from the University of Buffalo identified them. The teeth had been kept in the Canadian Museum of Nature, collecting dust in a back room. But thanks to scientists taking a renewed interest in them, the teeth have now been analyzed. Researchers identified the teeth as belonging to the Chasmaporthetes genus, more formally known as running hyenas. They differ from modern hyenas because they had extremely long legs that made them much quicker than their relatives in Africa. Another interesting point is that researchers have never found evidence of hyenas in the Arctic region of Canada before. Their fossils have only been found in Africa, Eurasia, and the southern parts of North America. We now know that during the Ice Age, when sea levels were much lower than today, gangs of hyenas roamed all the way from their ancestral home in Asia to the northernmost territories in North America. They took the same route that humans did 15,000 years ago, only about 1.4 million years before we made the trek. The Antarctic Ghost Base. Deep in the icy darkness of Antarctica, there is an abandoned ghost base still running vital scientific experiments without any humans there. The remote science station had to evacuate during the polar winter because a chasm in the ice shelf was opening underneath it. The entire base was under threat of literally falling into a giant void beneath the ice. It's called the Halley Scientific Research Station, and it's been operating on the Brunt ice shelf ever since 1956. But believe it or not, these ice chasms are such a problem that it's been relocated and rebuilt several times. It was here at the 4th station in 1985 where scientists detected the hole in the ozone. In 2017, the mobile buildings had to close at their newest location, just 12 miles from the old location because of the growing hole beneath them. Ever since, scientists have figured out how to occupy the base for only part of the year, while allowing their experiments to run through the winter without them there. These days, generators supply enough electricity to the station to allow scientists in the UK to monitor everything from a distance. The result is a frozen ghost station, devoid of human life, running its own scientific experiments. Black worms. Every year on Mount Rainier, billions of black ice worms appear from the ice and start crawling around. Scientists know almost nothing about the worms, nor why they wriggle out of the ice every year. Most of the time, the glacial slopes of Mount Rainier are lifeless. There's ice and snow and little else. It's only in the summer, as the snow starts to melt, that billions of worms, as small as scraps of thread, come to the surface. And even though it happens annually, scientists still haven't figured out why. But scientists do know a few things. They know this is the only species of worm that spends its entire life living in ice. They know that as the glaciers on the mountain begin to shrink, the worms are at risk of going extinct. They also know that despite living in the ice for months at a time, they can't actually tolerate freezing temperatures. Their entire existence is on the edge of tolerance. They remain perfectly fine while buried in the ice, like living in a warm igloo, but freezing winds in the warmer months can kill them. Scientists don't know how they survive the winter, but they believe they eat bacteria and algae in the summer as they squirm along the surface of the ice. Other than that, the worms remain a total mystery. Ice Age beaver. At the bottom of a frozen gravel pit in southeastern Manitoba, an anonymous man came across the bone of a monster, the likes of which you wouldn't believe. The creature lived across North America during the Ice Age, but went extinct a few thousand years ago. It was larger than a black bear, vicious enough to easily kill a person, and yet it was just a beaver. But it was a gigantic beaver. The bone at the bottom of the pit belonged to a prehistoric relative of the modern beaver, but the founder thought it was a pig bone. They brought it to the local museum during their lunch hour because they noticed it had a tooth like a tusk and thought it might be ancient. The man who found the bone had never even heard of giant beavers before, and to be honest, most people haven't. So far, this is only the 4th piece of evidence that these giant monsters lived in Canada. When compared to a modern beaver, it was truly huge. A modern beaver could easily bite a person's hand off with their huge teeth, which they use to bite through wood. But this ancient relative could easily cause significantly more damage with one bite. It weighed about 300 pounds and could grow to at least 6 feet in length. These days, beavers only weigh around 20 pounds and don't grow bigger than a medium-sized dog. The ancient species went extinct at the end of the last ice age around 10,000 years ago. What do you think about this enormous beaver? Let me know in the comments below. Solar storm trapped in the ice. A research team from the Lund University in Sweden analyzed ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica and found evidence of a bizarre cosmic phenomenon. They found that a solar storm, one of extreme magnitude, took place 9,200 years ago. It's confusing scientists because the storm happened during a quiet phase in the sun's life, in which they believed such events didn't occur. Up until now, scientists thought solar storms only happen during sunspot cycles, when the star becomes extremely active, but judging by what the researchers found in the ice, that's clearly not the case. They found in the ice cores traces of radioactive isotopes that are only produced when high-energy cosmic particles reach the planet's surface. Here's what's really scary about the discovery. The solar storm released so much radioactivity that if it had happened today, it could have wiped out power across the globe. Every city on Earth would have been plunged into darkness, and satellites would have fallen from the sky from radioactive damage. Air traffic would have been in serious trouble, and astronauts would have had their communication systems fail. Basically, a solar storm of this magnitude would have caused pandemonium on Earth. We may have missed the last one, but another could come at literally any second. 5 minutes, 5 days, or 500,000 years from now. Patterns in the ice. The phenomenon of ice needles is pretty fascinating. They form during an imbalance between the temperature of soil and the temperature of the air. When the temperature drops at night, some types of dirt will contract, while water in the soil is drawn upward. The result is billions of tiny frozen needles sticking out of the ground. It's shocking to see, and is surprisingly helping scientists learn more about the planet Mars. If you've ever gotten up early in the morning and walked across a field and heard crunching underfoot from the frosty grass, you were probably walking over ice needles. It happens all the time. But in some more extreme places in the world, the recurring pattern of ice needles create delicate designs like geoglyphs. As the needles freeze, they push very small rocks onto one side or the other. Over a very long time, these rocks become clustered in geological formations that look as though they were made by human hands. Looking at one of these clusters from above, you would think it was an ancient civilization trying to draw a picture using tiny rocks. What scientists find amazing and confusing is that the same patterns made by ice needles on Earth have been seen on Mars. The obvious takeaway is that Mars definitely once had oceans, and that there is still moisture in the soil. When it gets colder at night, that moisture is sucked out into the form of very small ice needles. These needles, over thousands of years, have created complex patterns all across the surface. Mount Everest's ice problem. There have been plenty of amazing things discovered on Everest frozen in ice, from the bodies of hikers to leftover equipment from ancient expeditions. But there probably won't be very many more. According to National Geographic, a new study has found that the South Col Glacier of Mount Everest has lost half its ice mass since the 1990s. The highest glacier on the tallest mountain on the planet has lost 2,000 years of ice in only 3 decades. What that means is that all the ice that accumulated over 2,000 years has melted in just 30 years. To put this as simply as possible, there won't be ice on Everest for very much longer. These findings weren't easy to come by. National Geographic and Rolex Perpetual Planet Everest expedition brought together over 34 international scientists and teams of Sherpas to take ice core samples and biological samples all over the mountain. They created a very detailed map of Everest's glacial history. They were able to look at the amount of ice on the mountain, where the ice was, over the past 2,000 years. They found the oldest layer of ice on the very top of their core samples to be 2,000 years old. That means that everything that had been laid down after is already gone. There is no word on how much longer Everest will remain icy, but when looking at the numbers, we can estimate about 20 more years before the whole mountain is dry. The scimitar cat. A decade ago in Canada's frozen Klondike region, a mysterious bone was found in the permafrost at a Dominion Creek mining camp. It was 2011 when the bone was found, yet scientists are still making discoveries because of it. Researchers are unsure exactly how old the bone is, with experts guessing about 50,000 years. It belonged to a predatory animal that lived alongside the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhino, and extinct North American horses. This animal was the scimitar cat, a ferocious feline you've probably never heard of. It was a type of saber-toothed cat, but without the great big front teeth. It was unique in that it had great eyesight and increased endurance compared to a lot of other big cats. Unlike big felines today, like cheetahs and lions, who can only use one burst of amazing speed to catch their prey, the scimitar cat could run pretty much forever. It evolved with the ability to chase its prey until its prey collapsed. This thing would chase a horse until the horse fell down from exhaustion. Sadly, we don't know much else about these animals. There have only been a handful of scimitar cat fossils found, so not much for researchers to study. We don't even know how many of these cats once roamed North America during the Ice Age. World War II plane in the Alps. A melting glacier in Switzerland recently revealed a plane from World War II that crashed in the Alps. It was 2018 when a heat wave caused massive amounts of ice on the Gauli Glacier to simply vanish. This revealed the ruined bones of a C-52 Sky Trooper Dakota. On November 19, 1946, the plane had been traveling from Austria to Italy when it smacked right into the glacier. The collision was at 10,990 feet, making the plane wreckage impossible to recover. However, there was a rescue operation. 4 crew members and 8 passengers walked away with nothing but minor injuries, being rescued 6 days later. There wasn't a single fatality. They survived by drinking snow water and eating the few chocolate bars they had to share between them. In 2012, a trio of hikers came across the plane's propeller on the glacier, but they couldn't see the rest of the plane. It wasn't until 6 years later when enough of the ice melted to reveal the entire thing. It's in surprisingly good shape thanks to being stuck in a block of ice for over 70 years. Arctic Ice Camp. There's been a significant amount of submarine activity in the Arctic ice during the past few years. We've seen a trio of Russian submarines break through the ice, and even the US has been busy creating ice camps and practicing their own submarine maneuvers in the Arctic. In fact, scientists with the University of Alaska Fairbanks helped to provide ice and weather expertise to the US Navy in 2020 during Arctic Ocean training. The Navy constructed Camp Sea Dragon, a temporary hub on an ice sheet in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. The camp had more than 45 personnel, serving as a command center for submarine operations. They also held under-ice navigational exercises for their submarines. This has helped the Navy learn how to travel undetected beneath the ice in case of some Arctic conflict. Thanks for watching! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and come back soon for more awesome videos. See you later! Bye!